We spend so much time in the product world buzzing about the big launches, right? The growth curves, all that exciting
Yeah,
stuff.
the glamorous part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But think about it, what actually happens when a product, reaches the end of the line. That final stage, product retirement or market withdrawal, it often just flies under the radar.
It really does, but it's surprisingly complex and important.
Totally. It's almost like counterintuitive, isn't it? You pour all this energy into creating and growing something.
And then you have to make a deliberate plan to, well, wind it down. How a company handles that says a lot.
It really does. And for product managers, they've lived and breathed these products. Switching from that growth mindset to planning an exit, that's a whole different skill set, a real strategic challenge. So for this deep dive, we're really going to tackle this often kind of unsung retire phase.
Good. It needs tackling.
Our mission is to get under the hood, understand what it really takes to retire a product gracefully, minimize the disruption for everyone. And we're digging into some great material. You shared excerpts from a chapter all about this retire phase.
Right. And I think the first most basic question is why? Why even retire a product?
Good starting point.
Well, the source material really highlights one key driver, market decline. And we're not just talking about, your own sales taking a temporary hit.
Oh, this is bigger picture.
Exactly. It's an absolute sustained drop in the overall market demand for that type of product. Everyone's feeling it. At some point, the economics just don't make sense anymore.
Right. It's like the whole pie is shrinking, and eventually even a decent slice isn't enough to justify the effort, the cost.
Precisely.
But that chapter you send over, it also mentions it's not always about a dying market, is it? There can be other reasons.
Oh, definitely. Strategic business decisions are a big one. Maybe the product just doesn't align with the company's future direction anymore.
Or they want to simplify things.
Yeah, fine-tuning the product portfolio mix,
Right.
focusing resources. Then you've got things like regulatory changes. New rules come in, and an older product just can't comply.
That makes sense. We see that with tech all the time. Security standards, environmental rules. Older stuff just can't keep up.
Exactly.
And the source also brought up mergers and acquisitions. I imagine that leads to a lot of product retirements.
Without a doubt. You bring two companies together, you often get, well, a lot of overlapping products.
Redundancy.
Right. So rationalizing those portfolios, figuring out what stays and what goes, that's a huge part of making a merger work.
Okay.
And sometimes, a product just isn't core to the business anymore. Priorities shift, and what was once central becomes less so. Any of those, or a mix, can trigger that retirement decision.
Okay, so the decision's made. Product X has got to go. What happens then? It sounds
Yeah.
like you can't just, pull the plug. You need a plan. The chapter talks about an end-of-life plan, an EOL plan.
Yeah, and calling it the flip side of a product launch is actually a really good way to think about it.
Okay, how so?
Well, a launch is all about introducing something, creating buzz, getting it out there. An EOL plan is about orchestrating its departure, methodically, carefully.
And the main goal?
The main goal is a graceful withdrawal. You want minimal disruption, especially for your existing customers. They're the priority.
Makes sense. And I guess these plans aren't one size fits all. The material said they vary by industry.
Absolutely. Depends heavily on the product, the market, the customer base. But there are definitely key areas, non-negotiables, that every good EOL plan needs to cover.
Like what? What's crucial?
Communication. It's foundational. The plan has to spell out exactly how and when you're going to communicate the retirement timeline.
To who?
Everyone. Internally, all the stakeholders, different departments, and externally customers, obviously, but also business partners, suppliers, distributors. Everyone needs enough notice to adapt.
Yeah, you can't just suddenly pull the rug out. Imagine relying on a tool and it just disappears one day. Ugh.
Exactly. People need time to find alternatives or prepare.
Okay, communication is number one. What else? The chapter really stressed the legal side, contracts, especially B2B.
Yeah, that can be a really thorny area if you're not careful. Think about existing contracts, service level agreements, warranties.
All those commitments.
Right, you have to go through all those legal obligations with a fine-tooth comb. They dictate so much about how and when you can actually retire the product. In B2B, you might have very specific clauses about EOL notice periods or ongoing support requirements.
So it's definitely not as simple as just deciding, okay, we stop selling it next Tuesday. Legal ties can really shape the approach.
Absolutely.
The source also mentioned using a targeted project plan. Why structure it like a project if you're just stopping something?
Because stopping something, winding it down correctly, involves a surprising number of moving parts. It's not just hitting an off switch.
Right.
A detailed project plan helps make sure all those interconnected pieces like managing remaining inventory, handling final supplier orders, updating documentation, training support teams on the EOL process, dealing with customer questions, all that gets identified, assigned, and managed properly.
Wow, okay. It really is a multifaceted thing. Lots of coordination needed.
Definitely.
And here's something I found interesting in the chapter. Even after a product is officially retired, the support might not just end.
That's very common and often quite strategic, especially for hardware or things with a longer expected lifespan.
Like what kind of support?
Could be things like providing spare parts for a certain period, offering technical help, maybe repair services. The material gives an example. Maybe a piece of hardware has a usable life of 10 years after it was made.
Okay.
The company might commit to supporting it in some capacity for that entire 10-year period, even though they stopped selling it years ago.
So even in retirement, a product can still require resources and maybe even generate some revenue through that ongoing support.
Exactly. It can be a profitable period, potentially.
Now let's shift focus a bit outwards. The source brings up the value chain. Why is thinking about that wider network so important when retiring a product?
Because no company operates in a vacuum, right? You've got suppliers and partners upstream, the ones who help you actually make or deliver the product.
Right, your supply side.
And then downstream, you've got your distribution channels, the partners who help get the product to the customer.
Demand side.
Exactly. Retiring a product impacts both sides. Your suppliers need notice, maybe you have contracts to wind down, your distributors need a plan for sell-off, maybe returns. The EOL plan has to consider these impacts up and down the chain.
It's like that saying, pulling one thread affects the whole sweater. You need to see the bigger picture.
Precisely. Good communication and planning with those partners is key to avoid, major disruptions for them too.
And what about internally? It's clearly not just the product team involved.
Yeah.
The chapter listed a whole bunch of internal departments.
Oh yeah, it touches pretty much every function that supported the product during its life. Think about QA, quality control. They might still deal with issues on units out in the field.
Customer service, definitely. They'll get the calls.
Absolutely. Manufacturing operations, they're managing the actual production stop. Marketing and sales need to shift their focus, update materials, deployment teams, if applicable. Supply chain folks managing final parts and inventory. Distribution channel managers.
Okay. It's basically an all-hands-on-deck situation, just
part.
for an ending, not a beginning.
In a way, yes. Everyone who played a part needs to be involved in the EOL planning and execution. Needs that 360-degree view.
Which brings us to a concept that always sparks debate. Planned obsolescence. What did the chapter say about that?
Well, the way the chapter frames it, planned obsolescence is essentially when a product's lifespan is considered maybe even intentionally limited right from the start, from its conception.
So the company kind of knows when it's likely going to be pulled.
That's the idea. It allows for more proactive planning for that eventual retirement. It's baked into the strategy.
And the Intel example was quite clear. New chips every 18 months or so.
And alongside those announcements, they announced the end-of-life schedule for the older generation. That's a very structured approach.
Right. It drives upgrades, keeps the technology moving.
Exactly. It's often tied to that kind of rapid innovation cycle. Now, obviously, it raises consumer questions sometimes, but the chapter presents it as a, recognized part of lifecycle management in certain industries.
Okay. So whether it's planned way in advance or triggered by market shifts, companies need ways to actually spot when a product might be heading for retirement, right? The material mentioned key indicators and portfolio analysis tools.
Yeah, these are basically the warning signs, the signals that a product might be losing steam or becoming too costly to maintain.
What kind of signals?
Could be things like a steady drop in sales volume, consistently losing market share, maybe customer satisfaction scores are trending down, or the costs for support and maintenance are just climbing too high.
Got it. The vital signs are looking weak.
Kind of. And companies use portfolio analysis tools, think dashboards, reports to track these indicators across all their products. It helps them see the big picture, spot the ones that might be candidates for that EOL discussion.
Like a health check for the whole product lineup. Okay. Now, what if you're not just killing off a product, but you have a replacement ready? A new version or an alternative?
Yeah.
The source talked about migration plans.
Yes. If there's a successor product, a migration plan is absolutely essential. Crucial, even.
Why?
Because you need to guide everyone, internal teams, but especially customers, on how to make that switch
Smoothly, I assume.
as smoothly as possible. The plan needs to detail the process, like how do you move your data? Are the systems compatible? Are there special offers or upgrade paths? It's all about making that transition easy, retaining the customer, and minimizing pain points.
That makes total sense. You don't want to lose customers just because moving to the new thing is too hard.
Precisely.
So after all this careful planning, the communication, the execution, how do you know you're done? When is the retire phase officially complete?
Well, according to the chapter, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
The phase is complete when the product is actually withdrawn from the market, following the EOL plan.
So success is basically executing the plan as intended.
Yeah, executing the plan effectively and ideally without any major negative blowback or unforeseen problems.
Okay, let's just pull back for a second. It really strikes me that product retirement, it's so much more than just stopping sales. It's this really strategic, complex process.
It absolutely is.
It needs deep planning. You need to understand your internal operations, your external market, your partners, your customers. And communication seems to be the thread tying it all together.
You've nailed it. It demands just as much strategic thought, maybe even more in some ways, than launching a product.
Because messing it up could be really bad.
Definitely. A poorly handled retirement can seriously damage customer trust, hurt your brand reputation. Those effects can linger for a long time.
Right. So here's a final thought that's been bubbling up as we've talked. We've focused entirely on products, obviously. But this whole idea of a life cycle, of planning for a graceful ending, managing a transition, couldn't these principles apply elsewhere? Like maybe to internal projects that have run their course, or even business strategies that just aren't working anymore? Do other things need an EOL plan?
That's a really interesting extension. You know, the core idea of recognizing when something's time is up and then managing that ending thoughtfully, considering the impact on everyone involved. Yeah, that feels like it has much broader relevance.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you think about how we approach endings, not just beginnings, in lots of different contexts.
It really does. A very insightful connection to make.
Well, definitely gives us something to chew on. I think the big takeaway for me from this deep dive is just how critical product retirement is. It's not some neglected final chapter. It's an integral part of the whole story.
Well said. And doing that goodbye well can be just as important for long-term success as nailing the initial hello.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks so much for walking through this with me today. Really fascinating stuff.
My pleasure. It's always good to shine a light on these less discussed but fundamentally crucial parts of strategy.